So, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host and moderator, and I'm also the creator of thechocolatelife.com. Today, we're going to be engaged in one of my favorite kinds of episodes, my favorite format. What we're going to be doing is we're going to do a live interview and tasting with the chocolate maker. And today, I am going to be joined by Mark Burrows, who is the founder of Pollinator Chocolate in Carbondale, Colorado. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I've been in Arizona for the last year, and so I've been aware of Pollinator because you're in Carbondale. How far out of Denver are you? And you're west of Denver, is that correct? On the other side of the Rockies?
I'm about 3 hours west of Denver.
Gotcha. So just want to situate things. So I've been aware of Pollinator, but you and I have never met before the recent Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Fest. And so we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the history of your business. And you gifted me with 4 bars. And as you can see, they're still unopened, right? I haven't cheated. I haven't eaten any of the chocolate before we got here today. But what I want to do is I want to start off with number one, why Carbondale, Colorado? Why chocolate? Where did you get, what was the inspiration for getting the chocolate? Where does the name Pollinator come from? And, give us a little bit of history about, the shop location as well, and what you're doing at retail in addition to just making chocolate.
Sure. Why Pollinator? Why Carbondale, Colorado? This is where I consider home. I moved here about 34 years ago and never look back. This is where all my friends are. This is the place I consider to be my hometown. This is where I will stay and probably, with any luck, die here. Not anytime soon. But I travel a lot. I enjoy traveling, but this is my home. About 2 years ago, I, along with my financial partner, opened up, or about a year and a half ago, we opened up a chocolate shop here in town called Cocoa Club. It's on the main highway coming through town. And the whole idea behind it is to have a place to manufacture all of my chocolate, as well as create a more social environment for people who want a cup of coffee. There's only a couple of coffee shops in town, and we decided to be one of them. And then in the evening, have cocktails, and eventually push that out into charcuterie, wine tastings, chocolate pairings, live music, a dessert bar, and a whole host of other things, and really anything else that we can come up with.
Well, I'm looking at your background right now, and for anybody, this is a photograph of the background. Mark is not actually in his production space because I imagine it might be a little bit noisy at a Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning. But while I'm thinking about that, if you're watching today, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, go into the live chat, go into the comments, let us know where in the world you're connecting from. That'd be great. I'll give the shout out up on screen. And if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make, ask for Mark, or a comment you'd like to make about the episode, please put those in the comments and we'll get to those. So Mark, I'm looking at it and I can see the workshop behind you in the photo, right? But I see something over on your left, and I know that there's something over on your right. So can you tell me a little bit about how the space is constructed? Because it's a little unusual, I think, when most people think about how they're going to organize their retail space.
Right. So the whole idea behind it was we really wanted to showcase the chocolate and the manufacturing of it, and people really enjoy and go out of the way to find places where things are manufactured just to see how it's done. And with the advent of TV shows in the last 20 years, people go on site and show you how things are made, like cars or bicycles or whatever have you. So we built a wall to seal everything in, mostly because it's noisy and in some cases can be dusty, but glassed off so you could stand at the bar and look inside and see what's going on, what we're making. We're going to expand on this a little bit more with some mirrors to help look down inside the chocolate making machines. Oh, sorry, over here. Oh,
yep.
There. That guy. Sorry, I haven't figured out my math.
Over your left shoulder is in front of you, and to your left is a melanger. But though the glass windows on your right, this is into the Cocoa Club space.
Correct.
Right.
So it's basically split up by thirds. So 1/3 chocolate manufacturing, 1/3 behind the bar scene where the baristas work and the bartenders work, and then a seating area. It's an odd space. It's long and narrow, so it's not the greatest space in the world. I'd rather have something much different, but it's what we
Mhm.
got. It's what was available, and I basically jumped on it because after pandemic, there was really nothing available for rent in our area. So many people were moving here from the cities to get out of the cities. They're done and fed up. That
Yeah.
there was no retail, so this one came free, and I jumped on as fast as I could, even though it didn't fit exactly what I wanted, but it got us in the game, and we've been had doors open for a year and a few months now.
Right. So this just for everybody. It's like Mark and I jumped on this a little early, and so we had a chance to have some conversations. And so some of the questions are ones we've already discussed, and it may become fairly obvious to do that. So Mark, you know, you've got this space. It's sort of like just towards the end of the pandemic. What are the challenges of building out a space like the one you've got, right, in the environment? Number one, there's a whole lot of uncertainty about what the future is going to be, right?
Right.
And then you've got all these questions about what availability of materials. What were the challenges about actually getting this space built?
Yeah, getting the space built was very difficult. It seemed like everybody was out of everything. Uh, Even on the especially on the electrical side of things, that pushed us over an edge that we weren't expecting. We were expecting to
Mhm.
spend X amount of dollars based on what we wanted to spend and what it would take to build out. We just didn't see this massive electrical uh, surge, so to speak, of capital we had to put into it. We had to
Mhm.
trench a new source of power from the transformer over to the building, install a new block on the side of the building, and then pipe it into the building. It was a significant outlay of capital that we weren't ready for
Yeah.
and didn't
Right.
want, but it's what we had to do. So
Right, but I think that the cautionary tale, right, if we can, and this is something we discussed, is that apparently the person who owned the building didn't even know what the electrical service was in the building, and
correct.
so you took the space, and um, so in many cases, what I've seen people do is ask the landlord to build those costs into the rent and amortize it over the course of a couple of years, or did they make you capex the entire amount?
We had to pay it up in front.
Oh,
They did take on part of it as
okay.
an expense as a building upgrade
Mhm,
because it's attached to the building. I'm not going to take it with me.
mhm,
We've got a 5-year lease on the place, so it doesn't make sense for us to take it with us, obviously. And
gotcha.
it makes their space more valuable later on down the road. So he did cover some of it, but
Mm,
definitely not all of it. It was still a huge hit for us. Um, and then, of course, there's all the little things like just finding glass, like that you see over my shoulders. Glass was hard to find, apparently, during the pandemic because
right.
everybody was out.
Yeah.
Nobody was manufacturing, and like the electrical panel, they were out. We had to wait, I think, 6 to 8 months for a new electrical panel to be shipped from the Midwest because they were out.
Yeah.
Um, so many things, and yeah, tables, chairs, coffee roast, like all the things.
All those little things. But, so, getting, stepping back from the mechanics, right, of opening up the space. Number one is what did you do before chocolate and why chocolate? And I don't think we got to why the name pollinator
Right.
either.
So before pandemic, I worked in audiovisual production, and I was a professional photographer. I did a lot of family portraits, and I live in a small town, so you have to do a lot of little things. So I did product photography and family portraits and Mother's Day portraits and events and things like that. So and I love doing that. I love working with people and as a photographer. And then, of course, audiovisual production revolves around people being in the same room at the same time, be it a concert or a medical conference or some kind of festival or fair where nobody was gathering around anymore. So I lost all that income 100%. So the short, to make the story a little bit longer, is in 2019, that's when I started to play with chocolate because after many years of buying other people's chocolate, I decided to start thinking about if there's something I could do myself because I was serious enough about it. I was spending a lot of money buying other people's chocolate. Uh, I wondered if I could do this myself. I had no idea. I'd
You
never.
had no background in food manufacturing. You just
Nah,
go, let's play chocolate. I'm a
no,
chocolate
I liked it.
fan.
Yeah. I like to cook.
Yeah.
I consider myself a pretty decent cook.
Mhm.
Um, but I just cook for my friends and family. I've worked in
Gotcha.
restaurants back when I was a kid, uh,
Mhm.
in my teen years, but never. It's a restaurant work is a brutal life, and I knew I didn't want to go there. But
Yeah.
uh, to make the story a little bit longer, I've always liked
Okay.
chocolate, but I never could find any chocolate I liked, which is a weird thing to say. So growing up as a kid, like I didn't like the Hershey's Kisses. I don't like chocolate chip cookies. I don't like chocolate cake. I don't like chocolate pie. I don't like chocolate ice cream. And that's true to this day for the most part because it's just not very good.
Mhm.
And then about 12 years ago, maybe a little bit more, I discovered this little company on my grocery store shelf called Schaffenberger. And I bought it and tried it, and it's like, oh my God, this is what chocolate should be like. There's got to be somebody else doing this. So that
Mhm.
started a many years long quest of going. When I traveled, I would visit every town, and in my off time, I would scour the city for every chocolate maker I could find, wherever they were, and buy their chocolate. And so I have quite a large selection of what I call my OTP collection, other people's chocolate, or OPC, other people's chocolate collection of. I have hundreds of bars.
Mhm.
Most of them probably aren't worth eating anymore, but uh, still, that was my obsession with it. So people ask me like, "How'd you get into chocolate?" I have to say like, "Well, obsession slash addiction." Um, that's just the way it is. Like I love my
Mhm.
chocolate, and I still do this day. Like when I was at a couple of festivals earlier, I bought a lot of people's chocolate because I want to taste what they're doing. I want to see what they're doing. Is mine good enough? Can I make mine better? Are they doing something better or different? And then to back into the final question of
Okay.
the name,
Mhm.
pollinator chocolate comes from that. I have a master's in beekeeping, and I love beekeeping. I've been doing it for 12 to 15 years now, and I just two of my favorite things in the world are my bees and my chocolate. So it seemed like a logical way to like put those two things together in my head and have it make sense. At least to me, I get that question asked all the time
Mhm.
because
So I want to jump in there really really quickly. So one of the things that I think, if I characterize, like, if I'm a craft brewer or I'm a winemaker or I'm in the spirits business, and I was in the spirits business for a while, so I can speak from personal experience, that there is a sense in which you're always out tasting other people's work.
oh
So
yeah,
you said, in the run up to doing this, as you were traveling, you were going and tasting everything you possibly can. Is this an exercise you still do? Like
oh
every
yeah.
time you're someplace, it's like, I'm going to go. Right. And so what aspect of it informs the way you approach your own work? If that question makes sense. And then
Uh,
before you get to that, right? So you mentioned Scharfenberger as sort of the OG moment, right? Are there other people whose work you admire that they're not mentors because they're not helping you, but sort of inform the kind of work that you do?
well, it definitely there's a large group of people that influence uh, my flavors, my tastes. Um, so I look at other chocolate makers for multiple reasons. One is I want to see what they're doing, what flavors they're coming up with, what unique, amazing things that they're creating all on their own based on where they are. And with all the new bars being made at Origin, there's some crazy flavors coming out of the Amazon rainforest and South America in general, and Mexico, and even Africa. The addition of different fruits that I've never heard of. But there's also the packaging. Uh, Packaging is one of the hardest things that I've done. Try to find something that looks good, that will be attractive to somebody else, that protects the product but shows it off at the same time, and also follows my ethos, which is uh, low waste, no plastic, and try to get it in your hands in best shape as possible so you can see what you're actually getting. Um,
Mhm.
I'm not terribly happy with my packaging right now. I want to change it around, but it's tens of thousands of dollars to do that when you're buying have to buy 100,000 pieces
Right.
all at once. It makes it harder.
That
Did I
is a
answer your
huge.
question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's when I work with my consulting clients, and so I would, many, many years ago, there was this idea that if you made chocolate like the Mass Brothers, you would be successful. especially if you packaged it like the Mass Brothers. And many people didn't understand. Well, the Mass Brothers had a multi-million-dollar investment in the company at some point, and can you really be the Mass Brothers if you're trying to do this on a shoestring budget? And so understanding what it is about the role models that you pick, right, and what aspects of their business models that are important to you, and can I duplicate any of them or not, right? The same, it becomes a really, really interesting question to ask, um, everyone who wants to get into the business. Why are you doing this? I mean, I don't think the world needs another 70% two ingredient made in Melanger from Bajofo Estate Madagascar beans, because there are hundreds of them. Right now, you may think you need to do a Madagascar, and you may want to go to Bertil and use the Bajofo Estate beans. Fabulous beans. I'm not saying anything about the cocoa, but what are you going to bring to the experience that hundreds of other people haven't done it already? And I'm really open. In 1994, my inspiration to get into the chocolate business was the work of Bonnat, right? And he's remained, a good friend. As a matter of fact, I was speaking with him on Saturday. Um, and there is a sense in which everything that I do comes from an understanding of that background. So it's my OG. So knowing Scharfenberg, and in 2012, 2013, it's when they were still owned by Hershey. Was also an interesting thing. They've since been taken private. I mean, it's a really, really interesting, aspect of understanding the history and knowing who your influences are, and then specifically what about any particular one you're going to be working with. What I want to do is just a real quick reset, and then come back to you with the final set of questions I want to get to before we go to the tasting portion of it, because I think the tasting portion is always fun for me. I haven't, I've had these 4 bars. I've had them for 2 weeks now. I haven't tried anything yet, so it's going to be fun to do that. But I want to remind everybody, you're watching Pod Save Chocolate. We're here with Mark Burrows of Pollinator Chocolate from Carbondale, Colorado. And I want to share everybody, this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there and you can check out all of the episodes from Pod Save Chocolate. Click on this link. There's an episode list. And also for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together an individual post. And here's the one for today. Now, there is a link to the Pollinator Chocolate website. You can go there and find it. There's a little bit of background, a little bit of history. There's a list of which of the 4 bars we're going to be tasting today, with some descriptions. And then I wanted to share this because I've been doing a whole lot of AI generated images, and Mark, because of the name Pollinator Chocolate, I asked Adobe Firefly to render me something: cacao trees being pollinated. That was it, just a 4-word prompt. And so what we've got here is, for some reason, it thinks it's a bee is pollinating, and it's opened up this pod. And so the pod sort of looks like a pod, but it looks like a guava. And then the seeds are oriented in the wrong direction, if you can see that. And then they still don't understand about pentagonal symmetry, right? So both of these, but they did get the fingers right. One of the ways you can usually tell that an image of a person has been AI generated is they can't get the fingers right. They did a pretty good job on the fingers of this. I'm pretty excited about that. But I thought it was really funny that here's a bee bees will climb on open fruit if you let them. So that part of it, but there's nothing related to pollinating here whatsoever. I just thought it was fun to share that. And I wanted to just do the quick reset. And to mention that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. Go to thechocolatelife.com, click the join button if you're not a member, and please support the work we're doing here. If you're enjoying the video, give it a thumbs up. Join the channel, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, or like in Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you are. Appreciate it. So with that all done and that bit of business out of the way, Mark, you and I met at the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Festival in Albuquerque 2 weekends ago, right? And this past weekend, you were in San Francisco for the craft chocolate experience. Now, as you reminded me, there was the first instantiation of this, the first edition, but it had to be closed down because of lockdown. So this was sometime in 2020. So this would have been the first full edition of the craft chocolate experience in San Francisco. How are they the same and how are they different? I mean, from your perspective, you're behind a stand and you're explaining number one, perhaps for the first time, what craft chocolate is, right? Um, Probably less so to people in San Francisco, I'm guessing. But what are the differences between the two audiences? Did they purchase differently? Were they asking very, very different questions? I think that people are really other makers who might be watching this who might go, "Ooh, how would this affect my approach to attending either of these festivals or both of these festivals or some other festival entirely?" So, I'm really, really fascinated to know because they were back to back within 2 weeks of each other. What are your impressions of the two different festivals?
Um, they were vastly different, but similar in many ways. In Albuquerque, the population was 10 times greater. Uh, uh, Craft chocolate experience didn't have as many people coming through from what I could tell. Is also in its massive space. It's like an airplane hangar. It's in the forget the name of the place, the Palace of Fine Arts, which is I'd never been there before. It's beautiful outside. It's like an airplane hangar inside. Very concrete floors, steel beams on the walls, meant to be an open space, and it's great. It's a nice space. They did a decent job of filling it up. There's a lot of picnic tables inside that you could sit at and enjoy your chocolate and have a chat and get a lunch. But there weren't as many people there as I expected there to be. I expected uh, San Francisco being a very densely populated city compared to say Albuquerque. Just the people didn't show up, and the other side was it was primarily all chocolate, like 99%. There's only a few of the things that were not chocolate. Then by that I mean like there was like a coffee booth, or there was Freddie from Costa Esmeralda selling his beans. Uh, so not selling actual chocolate. Uh, so by the time people got to me, I was one of the last ones to sign up, unfortunately, and I was at the end of the line. And by the time they got to me, I offered them a sample, and they're like, "Oh no, mm, I'm too full. Can't do it. Can't possibly do it." So there's that. I didn't see that coming. But in Albuquerque, then going back to San Francisco, the population there was very well educated about craft chocolate. They knew what it was. They knew what they're getting into. They showed up there just for that reason, and they asked questions appropriate to that.
For
And
example,
people,
I mean, so I'm going to jump in and out of here. So you have
sure,
a highly educated audience who's coming there for the purpose of experiencing all these different craft chocolate brands, which makes sense given the presence of Dandelion and a bunch of other brands in and around Scharfenberger and Berkeley. Cho is also, in the East Bay, a bunch of different companies there. So it makes sense that it's educated differently. I'm surprised that it didn't pull more people, right? And curious as to why that might be, and understand, sympathize as an organizer with where you are really does have an effect on the kind of audience that respects your stuff. But if you can give me an idea about like the differences in the kinds of questions that the people in San Francisco were, we'll get to other aspects of the festival, but the differences in the kinds of questions that people were asking in San Francisco compared, because you mentioned appropriate, and that sort of tweaked my brain.
so that kind of goes off in a couple of different directions. To speak about San Francisco versus Albuquerque, in San Francisco, I had more people stopping by that had stores that were shopping as buyers for their stores, uh, and different outlets that were online that want to carry my chocolate. So it was good in that way. So while it lacked in short-term sales, immediate sales, I will hopefully garner more interest down the road with uh, vendors that want to carry me in their shop in San Francisco or online. Whereas in Albuquerque, I didn't get that hardly at all. It's all in-person sales. Uh, I think maybe one or two people stopped by and mentioned that they were interested in it and carrying me in their store. Uh, so that would be a big difference there. I think too, San Francisco also has the availability of the majority of the chocolate that's there at a storefront somewhere in town, and they can find it. Whereas in Albuquerque, that's not the case. There are no chocolate specific shops in Albuquerque that I'm aware of that carries 25 different brands that you're going to get excited about. So there may be just that dearth of availability that kept people away in San Francisco. Probably thought, oh, it's a beautiful weekend out. Would I rather go sit next to the water with my friends, or would I go inside to a chocolate festival? So
Right, but I have to admit, the
there's so many
Palace of Fine
factors.
Arts is yeah, the Palace of Fine Arts is down by the Golden Gate Park, and you get the bridge, and it's a
Yeah.
beautiful location. And so maybe they're outside rather than inside, dangling their toes in the water. Um, but again, getting back to the kinds of questions that people asked, so I can imagine that there might be a more specific questions about ethical sourcing and traceability and things like that in San Francisco, right? And more general questions about what do you do, right, in a place like Albuquerque. I mean, is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah. I mean, you get a lot of the same questions everywhere. Like, why are you called pollinator? Then I have to go into the whole diatribe of like why that is. I'm a master of beekeeping. Blah blah blah. Um, I think on the Albuquerque side, people are more interested in like what's craft chocolate. What makes you different from Hershey's or Lindt
Mm,
or any of these other big companies that have been pushing out chocolate for 100 years? And
mhm,
then you have to slowly explain to them. That's when the tasters come out. It's like, here, taste this. This is the 70% from
mhm,
Madagascar. Here's the 70% from Tanzania. Can you tell the difference between them? Do you enjoy the difference between them? Here's a Ghana.
mhm,
The vast difference, in my opinion, between those two I just mentioned. Can you tell the difference? And most people like,
mhm.
wow, this is a new moment in my life. I've never experienced this before. Whereas in Albuquerque, they don't ask those kinds of questions. They're more like I've had multiple extensive conversations on sourcing, why I source from where I do,
In
and
San Francisco.
in San Francisco, yeah,
Okay.
and asking me what my sources were. They already knew craft chocolate, like oh, it's like
Mhm,
Madagascar, Dominican Republic, whatever. And also I have a banner behind me that has my name on it, and I have in fine print below that. Uh, Kind of some things are part of my ethos. So one word or one phrase that catches people's eye is it says slave free
mhm.
because as craft chocolate makers, we're all well aware of slavery and chocolate and all that thing with Tony's Chocolate Only video that came out many years ago, uh, highlighting that. And then I had to sit down and discuss that with them. There's people actually want to have like full on like half-hour discussions on where slavery happens in cacao because they've never heard of it before. It's a new thing for them. And one gentleman was like, "How come nobody else is talking about this?" Like, I don't know.
Right,
It seemed
right.
important to me, and that's part of my ethos. I only buy from brokers that can guarantee me to the best of their ability that they're going to reduce or decrease
Mhm.
slavery in the chocolate where they buy from its source.
Gotcha. Right. Which makes sense. I mean, I haven't been to the craft chocolate experience. I didn't get there, but I've been to the Northwest Chocolate Festival, and so I imagine to some extent there are similarities in the audience. After more than a dozen years in Seattle, people who are coming there for the most part are fairly educated, and Seattle is a fairly educated city in general about these kinds of issues, and so I can see some overlap between the audience in San Francisco in terms of a psychographics and a demographics perspective. Very, very different from the audience in Albuquerque. Before we go to the tasting part of it, I think one of the things which is also interesting is about the mix of exhibitors, right? I was worried, right? Worried may be too strong a word, but there were a lot of coffee vendors at the coffee fest, right? And I'm thinking, listen, I can tolerate a lot of chocolate. I can't tolerate that much coffee, right? Going on. But there was also people who were selling pickles, and people who were selling jams, and people who were
Oh yeah,
selling, chilies and
T-shirts and
all these other
stickers
things.
and yeah,
Right. And you and I were talking about one of these, smaller Colorado festivals closer to where you are. But there's a really, really fine balance that needs to be struck. So do you think, just from your perspective as an exhibitor, do you think that just this, 95% of the exhibitors were chocolate, and so there's just an enormous amount of competition? And there's not a whole lot of draw for people who might be interested in other things. Like there's one coffee stand, is anybody selling, arepas or, anything like that, right? Um, Do you think, just from a perspective as an exhibitor, which do you prefer? Right. So, would you prefer to have a lot of people who are educated, right? Right, or do you want people who are there for a much bigger experience? And I'm sorry, I've loaded this because I know what I want the answer to be.
I know what you want the answer to be too. I personally prefer because I'm a chocolate guy, so I personally prefer the chocolate specific festivals. But I appreciate the other ones like the Albuquerque Coffee and Chocolate Fest. And it's not lost on me that it's the Coffee and Chocolate Fest, not the Chocolate and Coffee Fest.
No, it is. It's Southwest Chocolate and Coffee. It is actually.
Oh, you sure? Oh,
Yep.
my
Oh no,
bad.
absolutely. I'm sorry. It is a chocolate and coffee fest.
All right, my bad then. Well, regardless, yeah, there's probably
Yeah.
if they have 300 vendors there, 20 of them are chocolate and maybe 25 are coffee. And the rest
Mhm.
are everything else.
Yeah.
T-shirts and cotton candy and
Beer, beer and
beer
wine.
and beer and wine and it's like and that's all appropriate. And you pointed out earlier there's a chocolate and cheese festival happening in Colorado in the upcoming months and I've been on the fence about should I go to that. It's in a town that I've done sales in before that's not great for sales. It's a smaller town, more conservative town that they're not spending the money on things they don't understand, but it might be worthwhile just to put my shingle out because I figure the vast majority of my job is to educate people what craft chocolate is all about. Different than what you're going to find in the grocery store. And people want to know why. Like, what makes it
Right.
different? What makes it better? Why should I spend $12 on bar on you instead of $3 at the grocery store?
For me, in approaching like that, what I would say is, okay, here's an opportunity to just really blow people's minds and say, here's a cheese and here's a chocolate, right? Not just vend chocolate, but go and say, we're at a cheese and chocolate festival. Let's go embrace this and go, oh, here is like a cheese board, a cheese and charcuterie board, right? And so here's the cheese and here's the chocolate and here's honey, right? And here are all the things you can do to make this an experience, which might be more appropriate for something like that. I mean, that's the way I would approach it in any event. I'm a huge fan of teaching tasting through pairing rather than putting something in your mouth and saying, "What do you think?" Right. So I would think about approaching it that way, but that's just me. Um, but what I do want to get is we've been talking about chocolate, we've been talking about tasting and pairing and eating. We're a little bit over halfway through today's episode. So walk me through this bar. So there are four we're going to taste today. This is the only one that doesn't have an inclusion or flavoring in it. It is a Coco Camilli. So this is Simran Brinda. It's coming from Tanzania. It's a 70%. So tell me about Colorado sugar. I mean, I didn't know that Colorado had a sugar industry.
Yeah, we have. We've had it for since the early 1900s. Um, it's beet sugar. It's not cane, obviously. That's a tropical thing. It's Colorado beet sugar, and it's the vast majority of people are eating beet sugar uh, more than cane sugar. They just don't realize it because uh, it's the same thing essentially. There's no taste difference. They're both white sugar. They're both heavily processed. Uh, I chose Colorado sugar about 6, 8 months ago. When I started looking into, I was using sugar from Native in Brazil, and they produce a
Mhm.
very high quality, very nice product. The farm is regenerative agriculture. Their tractors are solar powered. Like they spent years building out this amazing place. I would love to go visit. I haven't had the chance to yet. Then I did the research on like, well, what does it take to move a bag of sugar from Brazil to Colorado? And I found
Right.
out a container ship takes about 20,000 gallons of diesel to move from Brazil to the US. And then it's got to get me put on a semi from Long Beach to Denver, and then finally wind its way to me. And that's a lot of diesel. And I thought, even though I may buy a pallet out of the 10,000 or 100,000 pallets that are on a single container ship, I just have one. So it's not, I don't have that kind of impact on it, but I started looking into local varieties. But I don't even remember what I Googled something like local Colorado chocolate to see what was out there,
Mhm.
and I came across this factory out in the plains of Colorado, in the eastern Colorado part, where they've been harvesting sugar beets since the early 1900s, uh,
Mhm.
and making sugar from it, selling it. Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, they all, it's not kind of this large area where a lot of
Mhm.
sugar beets are grown. They've been doing it for a
Mhm.
long time. Yeah, the big difference is with the Brazil stuff, it was organic. Very nice stuff.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
my Colorado sugar is not organic. So I actually put a poll at my cafe that's saying, what would you rather have? And it shows the details like how much fuel it takes to move from A to B versus me driving my car down to the plains and driving it back. Uh, and the vast majority of people, probably 2/3, said local Colorado sugar. And at that point, I made the switch. Like it just makes sense. It's a little bit cheaper, not a whole lot, but uh,
Mhm.
it just made sense. So I haven't looked back.
Gotcha. It's fascinating. The reason why makers make the decisions that they make, right, and the impact that they have in business. Again, all right, what you're saying, this is doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on your cost structure, right? But it is something that your customers look at. So I'm looking at this. I'm saying there's only one aspect of your package that's not retail ready. You need to have the weight on the front, right? Just right, in order to do it. It's very crumbly and noisy, all right, which is not
Yeah.
necessarily. It's only a bad thing if you're trying to cheat your chocolate in the middle of the night and you don't want to wake your partner up who's in the bed next to you. That might be the only thing. There's an individual batch number. You've got a QR code, which is going to take to your website. You've got a best by date, an ingredients list. You list a varietal. Nacional is a particular Ecuadorian for the most part, and they're not Trinitarios, they're Forasteros, but I think it's really interesting that you list a specific varietal. I personally would like to see the backup on it because it doesn't make sense to me. But then there's also a description of a little bit about Coco Camilli, which I think is really, really fabulous as well. So you're doing what it is that a small, and I prefer specialty over craft, what a specialty chocolate maker can do, which is I can identify specifically where the beans are coming from. It's not something big chocolate can do. And so it's really, really, I think, a really good idea. And it's up front. I mean, the aroma on this it's not overly sweet. There's this deep sort of chocolatey note, which is all verging on sort of fudgy, which is not where I think Tanzania goes generally, but it is rich and deep and interesting. It's really, really an enticing flavor. It's not over roasted. There's nothing on the nose that says, I'm going to be, it's consistent with what I see on the ingredients label. I think that's the best thing to say. I mean, when I break it, the same thing. It looks like you're using a 70-gram mold rather than a 60-gram mold, slightly underfilled. You've got these shoulders, which can sometimes flake off. The temper is really, really, really very nice. Um, the bite is simple, clean, straightforward. The chew is easy. I mean, refining is really, really good. The melt is really, really easy. And while that chocolatey aroma is on the nose, what comes in on the flavor is a sort of fruity acidity that we normally associate with Coco Camilli, or that I normally associate with Coco Camilli. It's not as dominant sort of red fruit cherry, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of as Coco Camilli, at least in batch 520, which is what's here. I mean, one of the great things is I may get another batch and it may be different, which is always one of the fun things about craft chocolate. It leaves the mouth really, really cleanly, right? Which says, again, it's refined well. The balance of added cocoa butter is it's not the French style by any stretch of the imagination, but it's more unctuous than many 2-ingredient chocolates are, which is, it's that crispiness, which is I'm not a big fan of in 2-ingredient chocolates. So it's really well made. I mean, really appreciate that. Um, and it's not hugely aggressive, if that makes sense. There's sometimes when you get some of these chocolates that the fruit acid just beats you over the head, right? And there's a little bit maybe a fermentation funk in the very beginning, which I recognize because I'm very familiar with it. But overall, it's really balanced, and there's just wonderful. It fills the mouth, and as you breathe in, it's just yummy chocolate. So I'm a fan. I mean, how many single origin bars do you do, and is the Coco Camilli among your best sellers?
It is actually. I have 5 single origins: Tanzania, Madagascar, Dominican Republic from the Zorzal plantation, and Uganda, and
Is that Semiliki?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And Ecuador.
but yeah, and Ecuador. Thank you. From
Right. Are
Costa
those,
Esmeralda.
as you mentioned, Freddie's beans, or are
Yeah,
they okay? So from Costa Esmeraldas.
yeah.
Um, so the next bar is a bee pollen bar. I asked you this question earlier. It's not your bee pollen because you had to make a choice between being a beekeeper and being a chocolate maker, and you said chocolate wins out. But the people who are gathering this pollen are friends of yours, and they're
Right.
also producing the honey that you use, which I think is interesting. And you paired it with the Ecuador. So, what is it about the bee pollen, number one, that it's special, apart from the fact that it's local to where you are in Colorado, and why Ecuador as opposed to any of the other origins that you chose?
I use Ecuador and the Dominican Republic from Zorzal as 2 of my. Those are the only 2 I use in my inclusion bars. And I chose the Ecuadorian for this one because the Dominican has a fruitiness to it, the sour cherry, a deep, rich red cherry notes that I really, really enjoy that work well with some things. I thought with the pollen, I wanted to highlight the pollen, and it has dried flowers on the back of it too.
So, rose flower, corn flower, and marigold flower blend.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean,
So
it's a, if somebody is looking for a bar of chocolate for a flower lover, I mean, this is a really, really attractive
yeah,
looking bar on the back,
people
right?
buy this one
Uh,
primarily because uh, of what it looks like.
and the mold is really, really pretty too.
Thank you.
Um, but I noticed, in the Tanzania bar, the mold is out front, the decoration, and on the inclusion bars, it's the back of the bar that you're showing,
Right.
right? Which I think is interesting. Um, so it makes sense. I mean, there's something about the nature of this particular Ecuadorian chocolate which doesn't overpower what it is
It
that you're doing with the pollen
right.
and
Pollen
things like that.
itself, I liken to the pollen tastes the way flowers smell. If you get good fresh pollen, it'll be in the background, but it's there. It's nuanced, but
Hmm.
pollen is also a superfood. It's what the bees use for. That's their protein source, filled with vitamins, minerals, trace minerals, and honey or nectar is their carbohydrate source. So they'll blend those 2 together, and that's what they feed the younger bees when they reach of age to eat
Hmm.
that kind of substance. That's all they eat for the remainder of their life.
Hmm. So it's interesting. The aroma here on the bar is sort of balanced between the chocolate, which is not as forward, but you have all these inclusions on the back, and so the aromatics there are influencing the scent of the chocolate. I mean, the texture is crispier than the Tanzania. It's a little firmer, and I don't know if that's where what the melt point of the cocoa butter is or anything else that's going on. Um, um, the perception is, I mean, for me, it's slightly sweeter. I mean, the sweetness of the cocoa comes through, and I don't know if it's the sweetness which is coming from the cocoa or if it's coming from the bee pollen and the flowers. Can you help me on that?
Just from the cocoa.
Because it's from the cocoa. Yeah, I'm trying to find a part of the bar where there aren't any inclusions on the back. So you've done a good job of distribution on the back. It's a challenge.
I
Um,
try. No, it's from the cocoa. I'm talking to Freddie this weekend, and he's telling me that his beans have a 45% fat point.
okay.
So I think that helps add to it a little bit, just bring a little more of the cocoa forward. Also, I do mostly lighter roasts on my beans. I'm not doing heavy roasts.
Is that also your approach? Are you roasting your own coffee, or are you buying coffee in?
No, I buy coffee. We use broadcast coffee out of Seattle.
Right. So, are you also, you know, going more towards the lighter specialty roasts on the coffee, or are people looking for much more aggressive, darker roasts on the coffee?
They are lighter roast. They're not
Hmm.
dark roast for sure. They're a medium roast, is what I've been told.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Weirdly enough, I'm not a coffee drinker. Uh,
Or a chocolate fan, apparently,
yeah,
as long and anything other than bar form, right? Um, so I get you too. I'm not a huge chocolate cake fan because it's not chocolatey enough, and
right.
so I'm constantly striving to find new chocolate cakes. A flourless chocolate torte, maybe, but not
Yeah,
a layer cake for the most part. And you know, certain ice creams, certain puddings. But yeah, I mean, if I'm going to have chocolate, for the most part, I want it in its purest form.
I generally find things like that just to be too sweet. Like
Just
chocolate
make you
ice
sick.
cream.
It's all those extra carbs. Yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
I'm not a. It's weird. I have a chocolate shop, but I'm not a sweet eater per se.
Understand. Understand.
I like
So,
my dark bitter chocolate.
what I want to say about the pollen and the flowers is that the texture which is provided, right, through the little lumps of pollen which dissolve in their own way, and the flowers which have their own chew, make this a really, really interesting bar, texturally speaking. I know there are a lot of people who don't like inclusions. I'm a huge fan of inclusions for lots of reasons. To take a base chocolate and be able to do 19 different things with it, right? And you because your perception of the chocolate changes every single time you add something to it. I think it's really, really fun and something that I really, really enjoy. Um, but again, the back of this is a beautiful bar. There are some chocolates, especially a bunch of two ingredient chocolates, that are really aggressive in terms of, you need to pay attention and you need to decode them and, pull them apart in order to understand what you want. So they demand attention, right? And sometimes they reward attention. And I think what's interesting about this bee pollen bar, number one, is if people are looking for a healthy chocolate, this might be one, right? Because of the bee pollen associated with it. And it's not just the cocoa content, but it's the pollen content. But this other textural and flavor component, they can put it in their mouth and enjoy it, right? Without really having to pull it apart and decode it. They can just let it sort of zing around in their brain and in their tongue and in their mouth and go, ooh, what's that? It's like, so it's fun, right? Which I think is something that many, many people overlook when it comes to, eating a chocolate bar. Eating a chocolate bar shouldn't always be work, right? It
Right.
should be it should be fun, right?
Yeah.
And that might be part of your reaction to, if you're in Albuquerque and you're talking to people who have never heard of craft chocolate before, you're engaging them in a way, and you're blowing their mind, right? And it's fun for them in a way that it might not be for the more experienced audience in San Francisco, for whom this is more like work. If that makes Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
I
In
wanted
terms
to
of
back up.
characterization?
You reminded me of something I wanted to say too. You asked me what people are buying.
Yeah.
In Albuquerque, they're buying mostly the inclusion bars. They wanted the pretty bars. The honey foam that you were about to taste is my number one seller. But in San Francisco, everybody wanted the single origin. And they bought the
Interesting.
inclusions too, but that's the ones they really want to know about. That because they'd already been educated in that, I think, and like they knew what to look for. And like they asked me questions about, oh, tell me about your Dominican, tell me about this, and
Mhm.
go down that road. Whereas in Albuquerque, like no one really asked me about that at all. They just wanted to know what it tasted like, whether it was good or not.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And of course, whether it's good or not is a put it in your mouth and you tell me if you like it. Yes, it's good.
Right. So it's all
Right.
subjective.
So the the honey foam bar. So this is what we might call honeycomb, as opposed to honey. Also called honeycomb, right?
Uh,
As a candy,
yes, as a candy,
right?
yes, which
Right.
confuses me because I'm a beekeeper. So
Right. No, absolutely.
honeycomb
That's why.
is wax. It's what the
Yeah.
bees make to hold their honey in, and you can
Yeah.
buy honeycomb beeswax candles. It's the same
Gotcha.
thing.
No.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
honeycomb in the candy sense is exactly what this is. On the East Coast, it's called sea foam, and
Yeah.
there's many names for it. It's an old school candy recipe. It just enables me to, because most of your people are probably aware that you can't add moisture of any type to chocolate in its process.
Mhm.
That's why I am pollinated chocolate. No, there's no honey in any of my chocolate, with the exception of this one bar, because
Mhm.
it doesn't work. The crystalline structure of chocolate doesn't allow
Yeah.
the addition of moisture of any sort. It'll seize it up and
Right.
break it. So,
Mhm.
using this old candy recipe, I'm able to take sugar and honey and bring it to hard crack stage on a hot
Mhm.
stove, and uh, add bicarbonate
Mhm.
of soda, which then makes it explode up like a child's volcano with vinegar.
Mhm.
And you pour it on a parchment, let it cool, and it's like this giant pillow of sugar that then I
Right.
can break up and pulverize and add to the back of the bar.
So there are a couple of things there. So number one is, I'm smelling this, and I would expect. So there is this very, very faint sort of cooked caramel note on the back of this, which is not overly sweet, right? Which is probably due to the fact that there's some honey in there. It's not just straight sugar, right? So there is the
Yeah.
complexity. So are you looking for for specific specific varietal wildflower honey that you're doing that? I mean, do you know
No,
what it is? Yeah.
no, unfortunately, I do use high quality honey. I buy it locally. It's all Colorado based honey. Uh, Everything I do is, if I can, I will get it locally. My
Yeah.
sugar, my lavender, my honey, my pollen, it's all Colorado
Right.
based.
Right.
And I do want to throw
The
it out.
flowers?
The flowers, no, those are
Okay.
more Midwest. I just can't find them here. If I could, I would.
Gotcha. Right.
I
So I
want to
want to.
apologize.
So
I wanted to
go ahead.
apologize quickly for the noisiness of my packaging, because it goes back to my ethos of no plastic. So this is cellophane. It's
Mhm.
compostable, and
Mhm.
yes, it's noisy as hell, and it just drives me nuts, because you're not gonna take a bar like this into the movie theater without everybody in the theater knowing there's something going on in row 13.
Yeah.
It's just so much noise coming
Or
from. So
you're not going to cheat it at night next to your partner in bed. This is that
right,
you're going to have to remove it. So I want to point out that one of the things that I did is when I had put the pollen bar is I put all the inclusions on my tongue, right? And so whenever you have a bar with inclusions that are on one side, you should always do one with the inclusions on your tongue and one with the chocolate on your tongue, so you can get different perspectives of it. I'm going to do inclusions down. Um, so it's interesting that even though you have this honey foam on one side of the bar, it seems less sweet than the Ecuadorian does, even with the
yeah,
foam on the nose. And you get the sort of sweetness and chocolatey note on the front, and then towards the end of it, there is this citric fruitiness, which comes from the Zorzal beans, which is something
correct.
that we know about. So it's a much more complex chocolate than you might think. Oh, and there's this really, really interesting, pleasant sourness. I mean, it's a really at the very end. I mean, as the chocolate is leaving your mouth, there is this all of a sudden sort of at the tongue level on the bottom around the outside. It's like, whoa, that's really cool. And I'm kind of wondering, what the chemical composition of the honey does to the chocolate in order to bring that out. I think it's really, really interesting. One of the things that occurs to me you might do sometime, Mark, just for fun, would be to take the foam, put it into a blender or a RoboCoupe or something if you've got it, and then refine it into the chocolate instead of sugar. Right. And so you've got that in the chocolate itself, as well as at the inclusion level, and what it might do. I think because when you get it to hard crack stage and you add the bicarbonate of soda, there ain't no water left in it.
Right.
Right. You're just taking the water off. And it might be interesting to see how that changes the complexity of the chocolate itself here. It could be a really, really interesting kind of experiment. Um,
It could. I
what are
would
your
love that.
thoughts?
Um,
But
yeah, this is a 70% bar, straight 70%, and then with the
uh,
addition of the honey foam. So in in totality, it's more than 70%. It's probably more like 60 or 65%, because I've added sugar to the back of it, right?
when you talk about cocoa content, it's only what comes from the beans. You need to exclude everything else.
No, I'm talking about sugar content.
Oh, that
No,
was
sorry.
sugar content. So no. When you talk about cocoa content, so anytime you have an inclusion, it's outside the parentheses for the recipe of the chocolate,
Right.
and you do not need to include it in the cocoa content
Right.
of it.
And I
So
do
there may
not.
be more.
So
Right, right. But I'm saying is that you could replace some of the Colorado sugar
with
with some of the honey foam as a sweetener and include
right,
it in the recipe and still say it's 70%. And then you
right.
might get something which is a little more complicated in terms of its flavor profile.
Well, that would be more truer. It would be a little bit darker because it wouldn't have as much sugar in totality because I would be taking that honeycomb mixture and using that as my pure thing.
I would leave it to right the food scientists to figure out what. I'm just saying that it would be interesting to get from a flavor perspective,
Hmm.
right, to see how refining in the complexity of the sugar, right, would add some flavor, which is different. Because you may know that I've been talking with another Mark, right, at Blue Spruce, also in Colorado, so down in Kittredge. And one of the things he does is he uses a Dutch beet sugar, which has an invert component to it, right? And it, even though it is a straight sugar, right, that invert component completely changes the texture of the bar. And so I'm a real fan of, can I use the sweetener, right, to see about how I might affect the flavor and the texture of the
Sure.
bar, right? So it just occurred to me that I wanted to do that. So we have one more bar. We got 3 minutes left. I want to thank everybody who's here from the beginning to the end. Again, go into the comments. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from. If you have a question for Mark, please put it in the comments. We'll get it to him. Everybody can go to the homepage of the Chocolate Life. Here it is right here. Actually, this is the post for today's. Oh, it's interesting. It doesn't want to do my screen share. That's weird. Huh. I'm not certain why. Anyway, you can go to thechocolatelife.com. You can find the post for today's episode, and we'll take care of that for you. And join, right? Support what it is we're doing here. You also find a link to the Pollinator chocolate website where you can order the chocolate online. There we go. It did show up. So the final chocolate, it's just very, very slow. Interesting. Not sure why that is. Oh, that's really, really bizarre. I've never had that problem before. Maybe it will be better now. Huh. Nope. Okay. Not sure why that is. Anyway, Mark, we have one more chocolate to taste. It's just very slow. And that is this lavender dark bar. So it's a 70% dark. It's also the Dominican Republic, right? So it's also the Zorzal. And tell me about the lavender and what the idea is here. And so for everybody, I mean, again, it's a lot of lavender on the back of the bar. People are going, lavender. Lavender is it's going to taste like grandma's soap or something like that. So it's an interesting choice. The lavender grows in Colorado, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it actually
So,
grows in my hometown here. I have a local lavender grower. That's again part of my ethos. Use local ingredients wherever I can. A friend of mine brought me a lavender bar from I think Washington. That I forget the maker who made it, and it was has the entire back was loaded with lavender. And I tried it and I loved it, but decided that it's a little too much lavender. So I do a lot less of that. But this one I love. This has become a very popular one recently.
right. So before we actually go into it, what I want to do is do a quick shout out to Kjell from Fjorden Chocolate in Norway, Fjorden Chocolade. And Mark, you and I discussed you're entering the Craft Chocolate Challenge for the 2025 round. Kjell was actually a winner in the 2023 round.
Oh,
Right. So he's saying hello to Norway, so Fjorden Chocolade, but he's been looking for a way of using honey as sugar. I mean, there are some people I know who do make it work. So Chocolat Naive, they actually broke a couple of tempering machines trying to figure out a way to use liquid honey as a sweetener. But I think it's really, really interesting. And then Kiel says, looking for a way to use honey as sugar in a bar. And this will probably be the way. Cook it at the correct temperature and then ground it and use it as sugar. Yeah, you don't even need to get it to foam. You just do hard cracked caramel, put it out, and then you can powder it and then refine it in. So there are lots of things that you could do to
yeah.
make it work.
In my experience, you have to add it to actual sugar. You can't. I don't know how to take honey to hard crack. It's its
Right.
consistency won't allow you to do that. So you have to add it to something that will allow you to do that and
Right.
then you can mix it in.
Right.
Otherwise, you're adding honey in very small amounts over a long period of time, and I
Right.
don't have the
Right.
patience for it.
But I also think that if we think of, what we normally think of as powdered honey, it's mostly maltodextrin
Correct.
as the structure for exactly the reason that you're talking about.
Right.
And this is a way of being able to, I mean, for example, this Dutch beet sugar is called bastardsuiker. I can imagine using the Dutch beet sugar and the honey and getting something which just gets us really, really fabulous, invert, because honey is also an invert sugar. Ooh, right. I don't know if it's inverted. Lots of really, really interesting questions to think about. But what I want to do, because we're at the end of the hour, but Cal, thank you very much for connecting from Norway. I know perhaps you can go back to the beginning once it's archived and you can watch it from the beginning, because it's 8 hours different from here. It's so it's after dinner time. But the lavender is not overwhelming on this. I mean, I'm sticking the lavender directly on my nose. I get that lavender floral character like this, but it is balanced by the chocolate itself, right? So it's not overwhelming, that lavender, which is a challenge that I think a lot of people face. So if I just put the lavender on my tongue and let my saliva on the tongue, it sort of blooms the lavender, right? And you've got it, and then you can bite down on the chocolate. Again, Mark, from a technical perspective, there's no defects in the chocolate. And the chocolates are well made, they're well refined, they're restrained. I mean, I think in a place like Carbondale, or an audience like the one at Albuquerque, they're not necessarily looking for I am single origin kind of stuff. They're looking for these balance of flavors. There's a fabulous texture associated with the lavender buds as well, which is really, really nice. And in the previous bar, the foam, that fruitiness we talked about is missing entirely. Right? It's missing entirely here. And I'm sort of wondering is this something that you notice in this as well, or is it just me?
Well, yeah.
Right? And what you think about how the lavender does that interaction with it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to look at that further. I haven't tasted this bar in quite a while. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I need to excuse it. It's pollen season here in Prescott, and there are a whole lot of trees here that I'm not normally used to from back in New York, and so it's affecting me in a way that I'm not used to. So as we close out the episode, because we're a little bit past an hour, and you were very generous with your time leading up to this, what does the future of Pollinator look like? Where are you going to go from here with the work that you want to do?
We're still very small. I've been making chocolate for just under 4 years. Just opened a shop a little over a year ago, so we're just starting out. Still trying to get things figured out. My goal is to attend as many shows and festivals as possible, pushing my chocolate out in the world, doing more podcasts with people like yourself, and just getting myself known, more wholesale establishments. My ultimate goal is to push this idea to other states, have a pollinator chocolate in Kansas and one in Missouri and like different places. So then they would use that model to source locally there. So it become their version of pollinator chocolate. As part of my grandiose plan of world domination in chocolate. We'll see if it actually happens. We got to get this one right first, and it's going to take a while.
Well, but when we think of it, so one of the things about businesses in general, let's spend a few minutes we can, is that when I work with my consulting clients, one of the first questions we get to, let's define what success means, right? Number one. So what do you hope to achieve when you're doing this? And then as a part of that, there's also exit strategy, right? So, okay, you're going to create this thing. What happens when you can no longer do it, right? So, for example, when Scharfenberger and Bob Steinberg were putting together Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker, they knew they wanted to sell it within 10 years. and so they set things up so that it would be done. So they had that exit strategy to begin with, and they worked towards it. And I think the notion of let's take the pollinator idea and sort of license the name and license the concept, but unlike most franchise operations, you're not providing the central ingredients repository, right? So you're not shipping them chocolate and you're not shipping them. It's all going to be done, and they're going to put their local imprint in it, which I think is a very, very interesting idea. I haven't heard it. People express it quite the way you have expressed it. So I think that's, coming up with a different business model is very, very interesting. But I want, as part of all this is, you said you've been making chocolate for about 4 years. The store has been open for about a year and a half. How has your chocolate changed in a year and a half?
Well, I think it's gotten better because I'm able to produce in larger
Better
quantities.
how? Better
Um,
how?
Consistency of quality of consistency.
Okay.
Because I'm using machinery now. I'm using very tiny machinery, like the small premieres that will do 10 pounds at a time. Now I have a 50-pound DCM that I can do that
Okay.
in. And I have the large Selmy tempering machine that makes my life a dream. Uh,
Mhm.
Before I'm hand tempering with silk and
Yeah.
excuse me, and it was much harder. And the vibrating table is like the small, tiny little thing. Now I've got one that's 6 feet long. I got from Dylan at Manoa Chocolate in Hawaii. And
Mhm.
like all these little things that factor in that like increases my production significantly. Where I could do 30 bars an hour, now I'm doing like 300 bars an hour kind of
Gotcha.
production. Um, I don't. I think my quality has gone up because I can be more consistent in how I do things. It's easier to keep track of things on a larger scale. When it's very tiny, then you get distracted, like the phone rings or a
Yeah.
delivery gets made. It's like now
Mhm.
it's like much more automated with machinery just kind of rolling and taking over, and I move it into the next step. Another thing we didn't talk about really is we do more than just chocolate. We do bonbons and truffles and uh,
Gotcha.
caramels and things like that too. So that's another aspect of the business that we're moving into of
Right.
building it up, and that's helping prop the business
Right.
up as well.
Yeah. So it was you gave me a great segue to what I wanted to be my final question, which is, right. You have a chocolate shop on one side, right, where people come in and just buy bars, but you have this retail environment which is not focused on selling chocolate bars. It's coffee and coffee drinks and alcoholic beverages. And I'm assuming that's where you're selling most of the bonbons, and you have this other menu that you talk about. The average person who walks in, right, what is the distribution for sales? Right? Are people coming in and, coming into the Cocoa Club and then buying a bar, right? Are they buying a bar and going into the Cocoa Club? How do you find, I mean, because it's a very complicated retail environment for a small business to manage, because it's just complicated, right? So
Yeah.
how is that working for you in terms of, where the business is coming from and what people are coming in to do and experience? Because I think that's always a question that people have when they think about, am I selling just chocolate bars? What else am I selling in my retail environment?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts. It's very hard to keep track of all of it. The number one reason people come in is really for our bonbons. We have a display case. You walk in the front door. That's the first thing you see. The chocolate bars are off to the side. Uh, but the goal was to showcase the bonbons and the things in there. And there's a few bakery type items because we are a coffee shop. We do that. I outsource all that. I don't bake anything. I don't want to be a bakery. I don't want to be a
Mhm.
restaurant. So we outsource that, bring them in, and people love them. They come in, sit and drink their coffee, and then they'll peruse the chocolate bar selection, or they'll want to know more about the chocolate making, or maybe try a drinking chocolate, or
Mhm.
something else that they don't normally get in a coffee shop. So the goal is like bring them in with the coffee and keep them there for the chocolate.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
but the vast majority of our chocolate at our local store is purchased as gifts. So they'll buy a box of 9 bonbons and take it to a dinner party.
Gotcha.
It's like
Mhm.
it's an easy way for them to bring something that's not from the grocery store, something that's special and unique and beautiful that everybody was going to enjoy and appreciate. So
Mhm.
there's that, or a bag of lavender caramels, or whatever else we have going on that may be a treat. And we get a lot of tourists coming by looking for something unique in Colorado. So we push that
Mhm.
envelope as much as we can by saying it's all
Totally.
Colorado based. Our sugar, our ingredients, as much as we can. If it's from Colorado, I'm going to throw it in there and do my best.
Chocolate covered Rocky Mountain prairie oysters, right? That's the
Yes.
next thing on the list. No, not
Yeah.
likely.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I lied when I said that was going to be the last question because something occurred to me when you said that. So I'm looking at the name of your shape. It's the Cocoa Club.
Hmm.
So you're talking about doing live music, probably at least one night a week and all that kind of stuff. But so we talk about the club in terms of like a nightclub or someplace was a destination to go to and people hang out, which I think is a really, really cool idea. But do you also have a club where people can join and they get stuff as a matter of they're being a member of the club?
Uh, no, not
Okay.
yet. It's
Okay.
in the works. It's on the list of many, many things I need to accomplish of having a chocolate club. And they'll have two parts to it of a local chocolate making club where people can come in and we share it and I talk about new things and we even talk about other makers and invite people to bring in other chocolate bars. We can share and talk about it, what we like about it, have it just be a chocolate lovers club. And then there's
Gotcha.
the chocolate club where you can sign in and join and like $20 a month. You get 3 bars or whatever you get. How you get a
Mhm.
special offer like, oh, I'm making this one bar. It's an experiment and send it out and see, what do you think? Is this
Right.
something you would buy? What's your opinion on it? And actually
Right.
get uh, expert opinion from chocolate lovers who
Mhm.
would taste it. Would this is something they would buy?
Yeah.
And then specialty bars that give them first release of like,
Right.
I'll release this bar in June. It's May 1st. You're going to
You
get
get
it now in advance of everybody else, so it's a special thing. So
right.
yes, we are going to go in that direction. I just literally have not had a moment to sit down and plan that out. It's like you got a box, you got packaging. Like it says, like packaging is a bane of my existence. Like
Yeah.
I've got this wonderful packaging I love because it's compostable, but man, it's noisy,
Yeah.
and I really it drives me crazy that it's so noisy. But I don't want to use plastic if I don't have to. We were discussing this
Yeah.
yesterday. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we do
Mark,
this? How do we make this work?
yeah. You know, it's it's a 27-hour a day job. I mean,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. But what I did want to do, in the last couple of moments is that, there's a sort of an idea about a status quo of what a chocolate shop should be. Right. And I think that one of the things which is really interesting about what you're doing, again, and it may come out of this sort of quasi franchise model that you put together, right? Number one is if I'm interested in, setting up a chocolate shop, but don't have all the expertise, I can go to Mark at Pollinator and, there's a brand and a lot of the risk is taken out of it. There's a CapEx, which would be different from if I started my own, but I'm not going to make like really stupidly expensive mistakes. And
Yeah, I've already
there's
made those
a
for
place.
you.
Yeah, I listen. I understand what's going on, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to, explore for a few minutes for the people who are doing more conventional retail, that there are ways to think about the retail, which provide a lot more than just buying chocolate bars for people to walk into your shop. And coffee is simple, right, as a thing to do, but there are lots of other ways to go about doing it. And I think that what I want to do is congratulate, and perhaps it's coming from an entirely different industry. So events and AV and all that kind of stuff, right? And not coming from the world of food, make you think about it in a slightly different way from the way a lot of people do. But this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for sharing the chocolate. Really, really enjoyable. Right. Again, just I think everything is technically really, really well made. I like the balance of flavors in all of them. Right. I think that, on a regular basis, for me, I think that the two of the four bars that I would consume most often would be the pollen and the seafoam. Just the things that I'm looking for in a chocolate bar. But I mean, if anybody is looking for something which is unusual, right? These are, I think, options that people should consider. And if you're ever on the western side of the Rockies, on the western slope, and you just happen to be 3 hours west of Denver, make sure that Carbondale is on your itinerary. And Mark, last little bit of anything you want to say before we leave?
No, I welcome everybody to come by the shop. Feel free to ask
Yeah,
for me. I'm usually spend most of my time in back, like I'm at home right now, so I'm not even there.
okay,
But ask for me. Be happy to come out and chat with you. And Clay, I hope you yourself personally stop by the shop at some point this year,
Right.
if
Yeah,
possible.
well, I do have plans to get to the Denver area. I want to go see, a number of the people, now that I ventured all the way to Albuquerque, head up to Denver, and hope to have an opportunity to go visit people. But if I am in that part of the world, I will definitely make sure I stop by in Carbondale and say hello. And maybe what we can do is we can have an inaugural meeting of your Cocoa Club.
That would be
Right,
awesome.
so we can get together, and I can bring chocolate from Arizona from small makers here,
Yeah,
and we can have tasting and all that kind of stuff, and see what's going on. We'll figure it out and make it work. But what I want to do is I want to say thank everybody who's been watching. Go thumbs up. Go become a member of thechocolatelife.com if you're not a member yet. And to close out, as I close out all of the episodes, which is if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Ciao, everybody. Until the next time.
cheers.
Thank you, Mark.